The New York Knicks just pulled off the largest comeback in NBA Finals history, a 29-point deficit to the San Antonio Spurs in what looked to be a massive upset at Madison Square Garden, but that did not happen. No, the Knicks came roaring back in the second half and they won at the end. Final score of 106 to 105. Now, how on earth did this happen? If you were not watching the game, well, there's a couple of characteristics I would love to break down for you, starting with how this game got so out of hand to begin with. Going back to the first half, you had the Spurs come out the gates hot. Now, if you've been paying attention to the series so far, through these 4 games, the Spurs have started the game very hot, every single one. Except in the first 3, the Knicks were able to kind of come back and either take a lead or hang in the mix with the Spurs in the first half. Whereas this game was very different. The Spurs continued to soar in that first half, shooting 3-pointers and pretty much all their shots at a very high percentage, compared to the Knicks, who couldn't really get much going. In fact, in the first quarter, I don't believe they even made more than 10 points from shooting the ball in the field. They shot, I believe, 11 or 12 free throws, and they weren't shooting at a very high percentage at the free throw line either. The Knicks did not have a first quarter that was very good at all, whereas the Spurs, I believe they scored almost 40 points. It was just an incredible first quarter. And then you go over to the second quarter, it's much of the same. The Spurs are still shooting at a very high percentage. They're forcing turnovers off the Knicks. They're playing good defense. They're spreading the ball out well, and they're getting really good shots. That's what happened in this first half, was that the Spurs were playing at a very high percentage of everything they did. They did everything very well, and that was the difference between the Spurs and the Knicks in this first half, to the point where it felt like the game was over. I mean, the Spurs scored 76 points in the first half. That, I believe, is the most ever in the first half of an NBA Finals game, or at least the lead was one of the largest ever. I believe the one larger lead was a Boston Celtics in the 80s lead by 30, where this was by 29. Now, you go to the second half, and what happens? Well, the Spurs come out the gates, and they do not play well. No, they shoot very poorly. They commit some pretty poor turnovers, and the Knicks get a couple things together that really helps them. And Jalen Brunson mentioned it after the game, that kind of the mentality going into it was just to chip away, chip away, chip away, get a couple series where they score 5 and then maybe the Spurs would score 2, but just keep that where it would be 5 or 7 to 2 or 3, to just keep coming back and coming back and coming back. And Mike Brown mentioned after the game, head coach of the Knicks, that they wanted to get between 15 and 17 to go into that fourth quarter. They did just that. They made it a 15-point game after that third quarter, with which Jalen Brunson really took control of the game. But what was really brilliant about how this game transitioned from the third quarter to the fourth quarter, and keep in mind the Spurs just shot terribly in that third quarter. They only, I believe, scored 16 points compared to 76 in the first half. Just an abysmal third quarter. But once you get to this fourth quarter, Jalen Brunson turns into a very different player than what we've seen so far in this series. Rather than a scoring, you could say, points first point guard, he was more of a facilitator. He was getting everyone involved. That's one thing I noticed. And it really led to an alleviated pressure where later in the quarter, when he needed to get going, he made all his shots, and it was very beautiful to watch. But what I mean by that is he got Jose Alvarado into the game. He got Cat to score a couple times. Karl Anthony Towns, who wasn't doing much until that point. OG Anunoby still continued to stay hot. You had a lot of the secondary guys other than Jalen Brunson really get going in that early fourth quarter to really make it happen. And then once it was within a score, that's when Jalen Brunson turned it on and was able to take that lead in that magical shot where Madison Square Garden just erupted. Now, there were several moments where the Garden erupted, and that's why we'll get to the Spurs in a minute. That's part of the reason why the Knicks were able to do what they did, is because they believed they had the building behind them, but not just that, but they were able to do it as a team, do it as a collective. It was not one player that was the one who hoisted the team up, even though it was largely Jalen Brunson and OG Anunoby who did the scoring in this game. Rather, it was the team as a collective when it mattered most in the end of the game that really took over, came together, and was able to get the team back. Now, what were the Spurs' mishaps in this one, especially in the fourth quarter? We mentioned shooting. Shooting was abysmal, especially from beyond the arc, that 3-point range, but the shooting was about 20% in that third and fourth quarter combined. That was very bad. But the other thing is they played sloppy. They committed 10 turnovers compared to 2 in the first half. So you can see just a big difference there where the ball movement was not as good in the second half and sloppy play. Now, one thing I would argue that you're not really going to see on the stat sheet, but you definitely would notice watching the game, is that energy shift of Madison Square Garden. You could totally see it when you were watching it, is that I believe the Spurs kind of fell victim to their own circumstance of that they started believing in the Knicks, just as the Knicks and the Knicks fans believed in themselves as well. And you can see it on the court because the Spurs were making very little easy mental mistakes that even though Mitch Johnson would try to correct, and you could see that by how early he called a timeout in the third quarter, how many timeouts he called in the third quarter. I mean, he had to call quite a few timeouts in that third and fourth quarter just to try to break the momentum of the Knicks, but they were all unsuccessful. The Knicks were still able to continue, but there were little bad turnovers, such as some bad passes or a stepping out of bounds, or little things that the Spurs just weren't able to get right. And you could see it was all mental, and that's the beauty of basketball in this instance, is that no lead is insurmountable, and you can see it here because of the mentality of it. You need a Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan type mentality to stay clear and on task and on focus to be able to A, hold that kind of lead, or B, be able to overcome such a deficit like Jalen Brunson and those teams had. And that's why it's such incredible to watch and why this is probably one of the greatest NBA Finals games we have ever seen, because these types of lead changes, or rather insurmountable leads that are caught up to, don't happen very often because you are typically able to get a couple things go different ways. Now, Mike Brown mentioned it in the postgame that I really liked, is that A, you need some luck, and B, you need to be able to put yourself in a position to get lucky. And that's both what the Knicks were able to do in that second half. Not only did they play a lot better, as he mentioned in the postgame, they were spacing the floor better. They were able to get good shots at times, and not just that, but they also played really good defense. And that's the thing. I think that's going to be a little bit overlooked in this one, is that they played exceptional defense in the second half to keep the Spurs to a minimum, 20% shooting from the floor. They were able to really get it going. But that's the difference in this one. As you look on the Knicks offensively, is that they got the big shots to go down when they needed it. That's the luck they had. And that's the thing, is that when Jose Alvarado is taking a three, you're not expecting that to go down. OG Anunoby was electric from beyond the arc. He's not going to have a 33-point game every time. Sure, Jalen Brunson's incredible basically every time he touches the floor, but he was incredible when he needed to in this game. And that's the thing, is that you had luck when you needed it at the most points, and it happened for the Knicks. And that's the combination of the two, where you have the luck, but you need to put yourself in a spot to get lucky. And overall, you still had that energy from the crowd that you could feel on the court, where the Knicks were as confident as they could be, and the Spurs were very unsettled because of what had transpired. Holding a lead is very hard. Even if it is as big as it was, it's still a very hard thing to be that far ahead and not let up, especially when you have that kind of environment as you do in Madison Square Garden. This was one of the greatest games you'll ever watch, and I think there's a lot to it, and that's why, again, it's part Knicks and their incredible ability to overcome a deficit, but also the Spurs, their inability to capitalize on being so far ahead and keep a lead. It's very hard. It's professional sports. You don't see these things very often, but when they do, they are special. Now, is this series over? No, I think the Spurs, again, they've had to overcome a lot in this series already. The first two games, where the first one, you could say, went either way, but that second one really went the Knicks' way late, which is just incredible how it goes. And then the third game, the Spurs finally get to play keep away late. I mean, you lose the first two games at home. That's really hard to overcome, and then win game 3 in Madison Square Garden. So they've already shown a lot of resilience in this series. This is just another thing to the ledger of things they have to overcome, a 29-point lead that they blew. So who knows how they're going to be able to manage this. But if there's one team I think that would be able to do it, it would be this Spurs team, because they're very resilient and they're very young, which means they kind of have a little bit of arrogance to them that's going to help them overcome this deficit, because they don't really know what to expect. Now, sure, you can add that to the tally of why this might have happened, but still, it could play in their favor if they play their cards right. I do think the Spurs will stay in the series. I don't think it's going to end in San Antonio on Game 5, but I do think that this Knicks team is one of the greatest teams we have ever seen in the playoff run, and it's not because of their sheer dominance and performances that they put on the court, but rather their resiliency to come back from any deficit they face, and we've seen that a couple times throughout this playoff run, especially here in the finals, and that's just something you don't see in professional basketball that often, that resiliency, and it is really special. Like and follow for more.